so that he thought he should make a dainty meal on his heart. When he had said this, he locked Jack up in that room, while he went to fetch another giant who lived in the same wood to enjoy a dinner off Jack's flesh with him. While he was away, Jack heard dreadful shrieks, groans, and cries from many parts of the castle, and soon after he heard a mournful voice repeat these lines: "Haste, valiant stranger, haste away, lest you become the giant's prey. On his return he'll bring another, still more savage than his brother, a horrid, cruel monster who, before he kills, will torture you. O valiant stranger, haste away, or you'll become these giants' prey." This warning was so shocking to poor Jack that he was ready to go mad. He ran to the window and saw the two giants coming along arm in arm. This window was right over the gates of the castle. "Now," thought Jack, "either my death or freedom is at hand." There were two strong cords in the room. Jack made a large noose with a slipknot at the ends of both these, and as the giants were coming through the gates, he threw the ropes over their heads. He then made the other ends fast to a beam in the ceiling and pulled with all his might till he had almost strangled them. When he saw that they were both quite black in the face and had not the least strength left, he drew his sword and slid down the ropes. He then killed the giants and thus saved himself from the cruel death they meant to put him to. Jack next took a great bunch of keys from the pocket of Blunderbore and went into the castle again. He made a strict search through all the rooms, and in them found 3 ladies tied up by the hair of their heads and almost starved to death. They told him that their husbands had been killed by the giants, who had then condemned them to be starved to death because they would not eat the flesh of their own dead husbands. "Ladies," said Jack, "I have put an end to the monster and his wicked brother, and I give you this castle and all the riches it contains to make you some amends for the dreadful pains you have felt." He then very politely gave them the keys of the castle and went further on his journey to Wales. As Jack had not taken any of the giant's riches for himself, and so had very little money of his own, he thought it best to travel as fast as he could. At length he lost his way, and when night came on, he was in a lonely valley between 2 lofty mountains, where he walked about for some 4 hours without seeing any dwelling place, so he thought himself very lucky at last in finding a large and handsome house. He went up to it boldly, and knocked loudly at the gate, when to his great terror and surprise there came forth a monstrous giant with 2 heads. He spoke to Jack very civilly, for he was a Welsh giant, and all the mischief he did was by private and secret malice under the show of friendship and kindness. Jack told him that he was a traveller who had lost his way, on which the huge monster made him welcome and led him into a room where there was a good bed to pass the night in. Jack took off his clothes quickly, but though he was so weary, he could not go to sleep. Soon after this, he heard the giant walking backward and forward in the next room, and saying to himself, "Though here you lodge with me this night, you shall not see the morning light. My club shall dash your brains out quite." "Say you so?" thought Jack. "Are these your tricks upon travellers? But I hope to prove as cunning as you." Then, getting out of bed, he groped about the room and at last found a large thick billet of wood. He laid it in his own place in the bed, and then hid himself in a dark corner of the room. In the middle of the night, the giant came with his great club, and struck many heavy blows on the bed in the very place where Jack had laid the billet, and then he went back to his own room, thinking he had broken all his bones. Early in the morning, Jack put a bold face upon the matter, and walked into the giant's room to thank him for his lodgings. The giant started when he saw him, and he began to stammer out, "Oh, dear me, is it you? Pray, how did you sleep last night? Did you hear or see anything in the dead of the night?" "Nothing worth speaking of," said Jack carelessly. "A rat, I believe, gave me 3 or 4 slaps with his tail and disturbed me a little, but I soon went to sleep again." The giant wondered more and more at this, yet he did not answer a word, but went to bring 2 great bowls of hasty pudding for their breakfast. Jack wished to make the giant believe that he could eat as much as himself, so he contrived to button a leathern bag inside his coat and slipped the hasty pudding into the bag while he seemed to put it in his mouth. When breakfast was over, he said to the giant, "Now I will show you a fine trick. I can cure all wounds with a touch. I could cut off my head one minute, and the next put it sound again on my shoulders. You shall see an example." He then took hold of the knife, ripped up the leathern bag, and all the hasty pudding tumbled out upon the floor. "Odd splutter her nails!" cried the Welsh giant, who was ashamed to be outdone by such a little fellow as Jack. "Her can do that herself." So he snatched up the knife, plunged it into his own stomach, and in a moment dropped down dead. As soon as Jack had thus tricked the Welsh monster, he went farther on his journey, and a few days after he met with King Arthur's only son, who had got his father's leave to travel into Wales to deliver a beautiful lady from the power of a wicked magician who held her in his enchantments. When Jack found that the young prince had no servants with him, he begged leave to attend him, and the prince at once agreed to this and gave Jack many thanks for his kindness. The prince was a handsome, polite, and brave knight, and so good-natured that he gave money to everybody he met. At length he gave his last penny to an old woman, and then turned to Jack and said, "How shall we be able to get food for ourselves the rest of the journey?" "Leave that to me, sir," said Jack. "I will provide for my prince." Night now came on, and the prince began to grow uneasy at thinking where they should lodge. "Sir," said Jack, "be of good heart. 2 miles farther there lives a large giant whom I know well. He has 3 heads, and will fight 500 men and make them fly before him." "Alas," replied the king's son, "we had better never have been born than meet with such a monster. My lord, leave me to manage him, and wait here in quiet till I return." The prince now stayed behind, while Jack rode on at full speed, and when he came to the gates of the castle, he gave a loud knock. The giant, with a voice like thunder, roared out, "Who is there?" And Jack made answer and said, "No one but your poor cousin Jack." "Well," said the giant, "what news, cousin Jack?" "Dear uncle," said Jack, "I have some heavy news." "Pooh!" said the giant. "What heavy news can come to me? I am a giant with 3 heads, and can fight 500 men and make them fly before me." "Alas," said Jack, "here is the king's son coming with 2,000 men to kill you and to destroy the castle and all that you have." "Oh, cousin Jack," said the giant, "this is heavy news indeed. But I have a large cellar underground where I will hide myself, and you shall lock and bar me in and keep the keys till the king's son is gone." Now when Jack had made the giant fast in the vault, he went back and fetched the prince to the castle. They both made themselves merry with the wine and other dainties that were in the house. So that night they rested very pleasantly, while the poor giant lay trembling and shaking with fear in the cellar underground. Early in the morning, Jack gave the king's son gold and silver out of the giant's treasure, and set him 3 miles forward on his journey. He then went to let his uncle out of the hole, who asked Jack what he should give him as a reward for saving his castle. "Why, good uncle," said Jack, "I desire nothing but the old coat and cap with the old rusty sword and slippers which are hanging at your bed's head." "Then," said the giant, "you shall have them, and pray keep them for my sake, for they are things of great use. The coat will keep you invisible, the cap will give you knowledge, the sword cut through anything, and the shoes are of vast swiftness. These may be useful to you in all times of danger, so take them with all my heart." Jack gave many thanks to the giant, and then set off to the prince. When he had come up with the king's son, they soon arrived at the dwelling of the beautiful lady who was under the power of a wicked magician. She received the prince very politely, and made a noble feast for him, and when it was ended, she rose, and wiping her mouth with a fine handkerchief, said, "My lord, You must submit to the custom of my palace. Tomorrow morning I command you to tell me on whom I bestow this handkerchief, or lose your head." She then went out of the room. The young prince went to bed very mournful, but Jack put on his cap of knowledge, which told him that the lady was forced, by the power of enchantment, to meet the wicked magician every night in the middle of the forest. Jack now put on his coat of darkness and his shoes of swiftness, and was there before her. When the lady came, she gave the handkerchief to the magician. Jack, with his sword of sharpness, at one blow cut off his head. The enchantment was then ended in a moment, and the lady was restored to her former virtue and goodness. She was married to the prince on the next day, and soon after went back with her royal husband and a great company to the court of King Arthur, where they were received with loud and joyful welcomes, and the valiant hero Jack, for the many great exploits he had done for the good of his country, was made one of the Knights of the Round Table. As Jack had been so lucky in all his adventures, he resolved not to be idle for the future, but still to do what services he could for the honor of the king and the nation. He therefore humbly begged his majesty to furnish him with a horse and money, that he might travel in search of new and strange exploits. "For," he said to the king, "there are many giants yet living in the remote parts of Wales, to the great terror and distress of your majesty's subjects. Therefore, if it please you, sire, to favor me in my design, I will rid your kingdom of these giants and monsters in human shape." Now, when the king heard this offer, and began to think of the cruel deeds of these bloodthirsty giants and savage monsters, he gave Jack everything proper for such a journey. After this, Jack took leave of the king, the prince, and all the knights, and set off, taking with him his cap of knowledge, his sword of sharpness, his shoes of swiftness, and his invisible coat, the better to perform the great exploits that might fall in his way. He went along over high hills and lofty mountains, and on the third day he came to a large wide forest through which his road led. He had hardly entered the forest when on a sudden he heard very dreadful shrieks and cries. He forced his way through the trees, and saw a monstrous giant dragging along by the hair of their heads a handsome knight and his beautiful lady. Their tears and cries melted the heart of honest Jack to pity and compassion. He alighted from his horse, and tying him to an oak tree, he put on his invisible coat, under which he carried his sword of sharpness. When he came up to the giant, he made several strokes at him, but could not reach his body on account of the enormous height of the terrible creature. But he wounded his thighs in several places, and at length, putting both hands to his sword and aiming with all his might, he cut off both the giant's legs just below the garter, and the trunk of his body, tumbling to the ground, made not only the trees shake, but the earth itself tremble with the force of his fall. Then Jack, setting his foot upon his neck, exclaimed, "Thou barbarous and savage wretch, behold, I come to execute upon thee the just reward for all thy crimes," and instantly plunged his sword into the giant's body. The huge monster gave a hideous groan, and yielded up his life into the hands of the victorious Jack the Giant Killer, whilst the noble knight and the virtuous lady were both joyful spectators of his sudden death and their deliverance. The courteous knight and his fair lady not only returned Jack hearty thanks for their deliverance, but also invited him to their house to refresh himself after his dreadful encounter, as likewise to receive a reward for his good services. "No," said Jack, "I cannot be at ease till I find out the den that was the monster's habitation." The knight, on hearing this, grew very sorrowful, and replied, "Noble stranger, it is too much to run a second hazard. This monster lived in a den under yonder mountain with a brother of his more fierce and cruel than himself. Therefore, if you should go thither and perish in the attempt, it would be a heartbreaking thing to me and my lady. So let me persuade you to go with us, and desist from any farther pursuit."